Thanks for tuning in to leftcoastnews.net. News and information from the wacky, sometimes communist, liberal west coast of the United States. For more, visit leftcoastnews.net.
Welcome back to Left Coast News, where we break down the truth from behind the West Coast liberal curtain. Today we're diving into something big and something very political. A brand new report from the Washington State Attorney General's Office, the Domestic Extremism and Mass Violence Task Force Preliminary Report published in June 2025. Now, on paper, this report claims it's all about public health, community resilience, and preventing violence. But when you dig deeper, what you find is a blueprint for government-controlled social engineering project with heavy emphasis on redefining what extremism means. And surprise, surprise, the definitions tilt in one direction. And most importantly, nowhere in this 27-page document is there a single acknowledgement of Antifa or far-left political violence in Washington State, despite the last decade of riots, property destruction, attacks on police, autonomous zones, arsons, and assaults here in the Pacific Northwest. Let's break it down. According to the report, the Washington State Attorney General convened this task force in late 2024 and claims it's meant to create a community-based public health framework to combat extremism and mass violence. What does that mean? Instead of focusing on criminal enforcement, the task force wants to take a public health approach, treating extremism like a disease that must be prevented, monitored, and managed by the government, nonprofits, and equity organizations. Their model includes primordial prevention, addressing root causes like polarization and misogyny, primary prevention, community engagement and media literacy, secondary prevention, intervention programs for at-risk individuals, tertiary prevention, rehabilitation and reintegration for offenders. This is not policing. This is ideological conditioning framed as public safety. And again, their examples of extremism trend heavily toward one direction. The report repeatedly admits there is no universal definition of domestic extremism, so they assemble their own by citing the ADL, DHS, FBI, Peril, and academic researchers. Here's what stands out. They repeatedly highlight far-right extremism, white supremacy, militias, anti-government groups, and misogynistic subcultures. They cite national studies saying far-right attacks outpace all others. They specifically list militia groups, sovereign citizens, and individuals with anti-authority beliefs. They emphasize grievances around political liberty and government overreach as indicators. But what's missing? Not a single reference to Antifa, anarchist collectives, left-wing riots, anti-police violence, or political street militias that literally organized, armed, and attacked communities in Washington from 2016 to 2022. The report talks about extremists who vandalize, threaten, violence, attack public facilities, but somehow fails to mention Chaz Chop in Seattle, the burning of police precincts, weeks of riots, freeway occupations, assaults on officers, destruction of businesses, arson attacks on government buildings, all of which occurred in Washington State, and all of which were left-wing driven. The omission isn't an accident, it's ideological. The report includes a long historical section describing 1880s mobs driving out Chinese immigrants, racially restrictive covenants, KKK rallies in the 1920s, neo-Nazi activity in the 1980s. Is some of that real history? Yes. But again, they provide no historical examples of left-wing violence, even though Washington has a long history of radical eco-terrorism, the ELF and ALF, left-wing bombings and arsons, violent anti-police activism, anarchist groups attacking downtown during the WTO 1999, Antifa violence from 2016 onward. None of it makes the cut. This selective presentation creates the narrative they want, that extremism in Washington is almost entirely a right-wing issue. The report then lays out a pathway to violence model. grievance, violent ideation, research and planning, preparation, probing, and then attack. They talk about mental health, suicidality, domestic violence, and social crises. These are valid factors, but again, their examples lean heavily toward framing conservative grievances, political distrust, and resentment toward institutions as danger signs. Nowhere do they mention extremist anti-police ideology, radicalization through far-left online spaces, anti-capitalist revolutionary violence, Antifa-based recruitment pipelines. It's missing because acknowledging it would break their entire political framework. Not to mention all the communist and socialist groups that exist in the Pacific Northwest, hundreds of them. So what does this actually mean for Washington and residents? Here's the short version. When you frame ideology as a public health threat, the government becomes the arbiter of acceptable opinions. It's going to mean expansion of state monitoring. The report calls for community-based intervention networks, threat assessment teams, and partnerships with nonprofits to identify at-risk individuals. If you distrust the government, if you believe in Second Amendment rights, if you support constitutional militias, you may fall under their definitions of risk factors. Deflection from real threats. Left-wing political violence, which has been extensive and well documented in Seattle, Portland, Olympia, and Eugene, is totally ignored. A task force that intentionally erases Antifa's actions is not serious about reducing violence. It is serious about controlling political narratives. The biggest red flag in this report is what it doesn't say. The Pacific Northwest has been ground zero for left-wing extremism for years. Businesses destroyed, courthouses attacked, police officers assaulted, whole neighborhoods overtaken. But this 27-page state document charged with defining and combating extremism doesn't mention any of it, not one time. This tells you everything you need to know about the political lens driving this task force. This is not about stopping violence. This is about creating a framework to label political opponents as extremists, while giving a free pass to the violent left-wing groups the state refuses to confront. Washington doesn't have a domestic extremism problem. Washington has a political bias problem. And this report proves it.